The oldest human skulls do not look fully human to us anymore. Some have long faces, heavy brows, strange proportions or shapes that seem almost unfamiliar. Yet the disturbing part is not that they look different. The disturbing part is that, for thousands of years, every generation probably believed their own face was the final version of being human. They could not see themselves changing while change was already happening. A skull is not only bone. It is a slow record of climate, hunger, migration, disease, isolation, survival, and time pressing against flesh for thousands of years. When we stare into ancient faces, we are not simply looking at strangers from the past. In some ways, we are looking at unfinished versions of ourselves. And if human faces changed this much before recorded history even began, what exactly will a human face become in the future? When the first ancient human skulls were carefully uncovered in Europe during the 19th century, many people did not believe they belonged to humans at all. The faces seemed too heavy, the brows pushed too far forward, the jaws looked powerful in a way that felt uncomfortable to modern eyes. Some scientists argued that these bones belonged to diseased individuals. Others believed they came from primitive creatures that stood somewhere between humans and animals. The deeper fear hiding beneath those debates was simple and quiet. If these skulls were truly human, then the human story was far stranger than anyone had imagined. For most of history, people assumed the human face had always looked more or less the same. Ancient paintings, statues, and stories reinforced that feeling. Humans recognized themselves in the past because they wanted continuity. They wanted to believe that human identity had remained stable across time. Then archaeology began pulling unfamiliar faces from caves, riverbeds, and layers of stone. Suddenly, the past no longer looked familiar. In 1856, workers in Germany uncovered bones in the Neander Valley that would later become some of the most famous human remains ever discovered. The skull had a long and low shape, with thick brow ridges and a wider face than most living people. At first, even trained scholars struggled to understand what they were seeing. Some insisted the bones belonged to a modern man, suffering from illness or deformity. The idea that another kind of human once walked the earth felt too unsettling. Yet more discoveries slowly appeared across Europe and Asia, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. These skulls were not accidents. They represented real populations of ancient humans who lived, hunted, survived, and died long before recorded history. The strange appearance of ancient skulls did not come from fantasy or exaggeration. Bone preserves physical pressures over enormous stretches of time. Every thick ridge, broad cheekbone, or unusual proportion reflects generations adapting to environments that modern people no longer experience. Early humans lived without heated homes, processed food, modern medicine, or stable agriculture. Their bodies carried the marks of survival directly in their skeletons. Even the way they used their jaws affected the shape of their faces. Ancient humans often chewed tougher foods for years, beginning in childhood. Their muscles pulled against bone every day, slowly influencing skull structure over generations. Climate also mattered. Researchers studying ancient populations have found connections between colder environments and broader facial structures, especially around the nose and sinus regions. These changes likely helped warm cold air before it reached the lungs. The skull was never simply a container for the brain. It was part of a living system responding to the world around it. What disturbed many early observers was not only the difference itself, but the realization that humans could change at all. A skull feels permanent when held in the hand. Bone gives the illusion of stability. Yet ancient skulls revealed something deeply uncomfortable. Human appearance has never been fixed. The face people consider normal today is only a temporary moment within a much longer process. Tens of thousands of years ago, certain facial traits looked ordinary to the people living at that time. They would not have seen themselves as strange. In the same way, modern humans rarely think of their own faces as temporary, but the archaeological record quietly suggests otherwise. The human face has always been moving slowly through time, shaped by forces most individuals never notice while they are alive. Looking at ancient skulls can feel unsettling because they challenge the belief that humanity exists in a finished form. Those hollow eye sockets and unfamiliar proportions remind us that human identity is not frozen. It never was. And perhaps that is why ancient faces continue to fascinate people even now. Somewhere beneath the scientific measurements and museum displays is a more personal question. If people from the distant past could look so unfamiliar to us, how unfamiliar might we appear to humans thousands of years from now? Human beings are extremely sensitive to faces. Long before written language existed, the brain learned to read tiny details in other human expressions. A slight movement around the eyes could signal danger. The shape of a mouth could reveal anger, fear, sickness, or trust. Survival depended on recognizing other humans quickly and correctly. Even today, the human brain processes faces with remarkable speed. Researchers have shown that people can recognize emotional expressions in fractions of a second. The mind is constantly comparing faces against an internal pattern of what feels normal and familiar. When ancient skulls appear outside that pattern, people often experience discomfort before they even understand why. The reaction is not entirely rational. It comes from very old instincts buried deep within human psychology. A modern human face has proportions that most people unconsciously expect. The forehead rises vertically. The brows are usually softer and less pronounced. The chin stands out clearly beneath the mouth. Ancient skulls sometimes interrupt those expectations. A heavy brow ridge can create deep shadows over the eyes. A long skull shape changes the balance of the entire head. Larger jaws and wider cheekbones alter the structure people instinctively associate with modern humanity. None of these traits are monstrous. They are simply unfamiliar combinations of normal human anatomy, shaped by different conditions over immense periods of time. Yet unfamiliar faces often trigger caution in the brain before conscious thought begins. This reaction may explain why some early scientists resisted accepting ancient skulls as fully human. The discomfort was emotional as much as intellectual. There is another reason ancient faces feel unsettling. Humans are trained from birth to search for identity inside faces. People look into faces for evidence of personality, emotion, intelligence, and intention. A skull removes all of those signals at once. The eyes are gone. The skin is gone. The voice disappeared thousands of years ago. Only bone remains. When the structure itself already looks unfamiliar, the mind struggles to fill in the missing human details. Ancient skulls can seem strangely silent because they no longer provide the social cues living faces naturally offer. Museums often intensify this effect without meaning to. Harsh lighting, empty eye sockets, and glass displays can make ancient remains feel distant or eerie. Yet these individuals were once ordinary people within their own communities. They slept beside fires, cared for children, searched for food, feared injury, and recognized each other's faces as completely normal. The strangeness exists largely from the perspective of modern observers comparing ancient anatomy to present-day expectations. Scientists now understand that variation within human populations has always existed, even among living humans. Skull shapes differ naturally across regions and genetic backgrounds. Ancient populations often experience stronger environmental pressures, smaller isolated groups, and harsher climates, all of which could gradually influence skeletal traits over many generations. What modern viewers interpret as strange may actually reflect adaptation rather than abnormality. A broader face, thicker bone structure, or larger nasal cavity often carried practical advantages under ancient conditions. The skull was shaped slowly by survival itself. There is also a deeper psychological layer behind these reactions. Ancient skulls force people to confront time in a physical form. Looking at old bones means facing evidence that countless human lives existed before modern civilization. Entire populations lived and disappeared without leaving names, photographs, or written memories. The skull becomes proof that human identity can vanish while the species continues forward. Many people feel an uneasy tension when staring at ancient remains because they recognize something familiar hidden inside something unfamiliar. The proportions may look different, but the basic structure still belongs to a human being. That combination creates a strange emotional effect. The viewer senses connection and distance at the same time. Perhaps this is why ancient skulls continue to capture attention across cultures and generations. They remind people that humanity has never been as stable or as permanent as it appears in everyday life. The modern human face feels natural only because it is the version we happen to know now. Thousands of years from today, future humans may look back at our own skulls with the same mixture of recognition and confusion. When people say an ancient skull looks strange, they are usually reacting to a small number of physical differences that stand out immediately to the human eye. One of the most noticeable is the brow ridge. In many ancient human populations, especially among Neanderthals and some earlier hominin groups, the bone above the eyes projected farther forward than it does in most modern humans. This created a heavier appearance around the upper face. Under certain lighting, those ridges cast deeper shadows over the eye sockets, which can make ancient skulls appear more severe or intimidating, even though the individuals themselves were simply adapted to different conditions. Scientists still debate every detail of why brow ridges became so pronounced in some ancient populations. Some researchers believe they help distribute physical stress created by strong chewing forces. Others suggest they may have been connected to facial structure, as the brain case and face evolved over time. What matters most is that these features were normal within those populations. They were not deformities. They were part of ordinary human variation across deep history. Another feature people notice quickly is jaw size. Ancient skulls often had larger jaws and stronger muscle attachment areas than modern humans. Life before agriculture demanded constant physical use of the mouth and teeth. Food was harder, rougher, and less processed. Chewing began shaping the muscles and bones of the face early in childhood. Over countless generations, populations adapted to those conditions. Modern humans, especially in industrial societies, eat softer foods that require far less force. As diets changed, jaw size gradually became smaller in many populations. This shift may even explain why wisdom teeth often cause problems today. Human jaws reduced faster than the number of teeth did. Ancient skulls also tend to have different overall proportions. Some have longer and lower brain cases compared to the more rounded skull shape common in living humans. This difference can subtly alter the appearance of the entire face and head. A long skull changes the visual balance between the forehead, jaw, and back of the head. Modern viewers may interpret these shapes as unusual, simply because contemporary human populations generally display different average proportions. The nose region also varied significantly among ancient groups. In colder climates, broader nasal openings may have helped warm and humidify freezing air before it reached the lungs. Researchers studying ancient populations have found evidence suggesting that climate influenced facial anatomy over long periods. Faces were not sculpted randomly. They responded slowly to survival pressures connected to temperature, food availability, movement, and environment. Even cheekbones could appear more prominent in some populations due to differences in muscle use, facial growth, and genetic inheritance. It is important to understand that ancient skulls rarely belonged to a single uniform type of human. Human evolution did not move in a straight line. Different populations lived across vast geographic regions under different environmental pressures. Some groups remained isolated for long periods, allowing certain traits to become more common locally. Others mixed with neighboring populations. The result was a constantly shifting mosaic of human forms, rather than one simple progression from primitive to modern. Popular culture sometimes creates the false impression that ancient humans all looked harsh, brutal, or animal-like. Real anthropology presents a more careful picture. Many ancient skulls look unusual only when isolated behind museum glass. When researchers reconstruct faces using muscles, skin, and hair based on forensic evidence, the results often appear surprisingly human. The differences remain visible, but so does the familiarity. Ancient people laughed, formed relationships, protected children, and recognized emotion in each other's faces just as modern humans do today. Bone alone exaggerates difference because it removes the softness that living faces naturally contain. Perhaps the most important thing ancient skulls reveal is that humanity has always existed on a spectrum of change. No single skull represents a final version of the human species. The features people consider normal today emerged through thousands of generations adapting to constantly changing worlds. Ancient faces only appear strange because modern humans briefly occupy one moment inside that longer process. The skulls of the past are reminders that human appearance has never stood still for very long. A human skull is often imagined as something silent and empty. Yet to archaeologists and anthropologists it can contain an extraordinary amount of information. Bone records, pressure, stress, injury, growth, disease, nutrition, and age. Even after thousands of years underground, a skull can still preserve clues about how a person lived and what kind of world surrounded them. Ancient skulls look different from modern ones not because evolution followed a mysterious path, but because human bodies continuously responded to survival conditions across immense stretches of time. Every ridge, curve, and proportion tells part of that story. One of the first things scientists study in ancient skulls is wear on the teeth. Teeth are remarkably durable and often survive long after softer bone has decayed. Patterns of wear can reveal what kinds of food people ate and how physically demanding daily life was. Many ancient humans had teeth worn down far more heavily than modern people. Tiny scratches and flattened surfaces suggest constant chewing of rough plant fibers, dried meat, stone-ground grains, or food contaminated with grit and dust. Some populations even used their teeth as tools, gripping animal hides or plant fibers repeatedly throughout life. The skull slowly adapted around these repeated actions. In this way, the face itself became connected to ordinary survival. Ancient skulls can also preserve signs of injury. Healed fractures sometimes show that a person survived serious accidents or violence long before modern medicine existed. A broken bone that healed unevenly may indicate months or years of recovery. In some cases, researchers have found evidence of ancient surgical procedures such as trepanation, where small openings were intentionally made in the skull. The reasons are still debated, but some individuals survived these procedures, showing that prehistoric communities possessed forms of medical knowledge and long-term care. These discoveries changed the way modern people imagine ancient humans. They were not mindless creatures struggling blindly through nature. They adapted, experimented, and cared for one another under difficult conditions. The shape of a skull can also reveal developmental pressures during childhood. Nutrition affects bone growth over long periods. Chronic hunger, disease, or environmental stress can subtly influence skeletal structure as children mature. Ancient populations often lived through harsh seasonal cycles where food availability changed dramatically. Some years may have brought abundance, while others brought scarcity. The human body recorded those conditions silently over generations. Scientists examining ancient skulls sometimes identify signs of nutritional stress preserved in bone density and growth patterns. Even the smallest details can help reconstruct lost environments. Climate left marks on skulls as well. Human populations living in colder regions often developed facial features that differed from those in hotter climates. Researchers believe some of these changes helped regulate breathing and heat exchange. Broader facial structures and larger nasal cavities may have improved the warming of cold air before it entered the lungs. Meanwhile, populations in warmer environments experienced different pressures. None of these traits emerged suddenly. They accumulated gradually across countless generations, shaped by survival rather than design. Looking at ancient skulls means looking at biology, slowly responding to geography. The brain itself also influenced skull structure over time. As human brains evolved and reorganized, the surrounding skull adapted alongside them. Yet this process was not simple or linear. Different human populations existed across different regions for enormous periods, often developing unique combinations of traits. Ancient skulls therefore represent a wide range of human experiences, rather than one single evolutionary ladder. Some skulls combined features that seem surprisingly modern with others that appear more ancient. Human evolution behaved more like overlapping streams than a straight road. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about ancient skulls is how much ordinary life they preserve. A skull can hint at what someone ate, how they worked, what climate they endured, whether they survived illness, and how their community may have cared for them. The face is not separate from the world around it. Over thousands of years, survival itself slowly shaped human anatomy. Ancient skulls looked different because ancient lives were different. The bones simply remembered what the living body experienced for generations before history was ever written down. The human face feels personal and individual, yet over very long periods of time it also behaves like a biological response to the environment. Ancient skulls did not become different randomly. Climate, food, movement, disease, and geography slowly shaped human anatomy generation after generation. Most of these changes happened so gradually that no single person would ever notice them during their lifetime. But across thousands of years, the accumulated effects became visible in bone. This is one reason ancient skulls can appear unfamiliar today. They belong to populations that adapted to worlds very different from the modern one. Climate was one of the strongest pressures acting on ancient humans. During the Ice Age and other cold periods, large parts of Europe and Asia experienced freezing temperatures for enormous stretches of time. Human bodies had to survive not just winter, but generations of extreme cold. Researchers studying ancient populations have observed patterns suggesting that facial structure sometimes shifted in response to these conditions. Broader faces and larger nasal cavities may have helped warm and humidify cold air before it reached the lungs. Cold, dry air can damage delicate tissues inside the respiratory system, so the shape of the nose likely mattered more than modern people realize. Ancient humans living in harsh climates were not consciously changing their faces. Rather, over many generations, traits that improved survival gradually became more common within populations. Warmer climates influenced anatomy differently. In hotter regions, human groups often developed narrower nasal structures and different body proportions connected to heat regulation. The skull became part of a larger survival system, balancing temperature, breathing, hydration, and energy use. Human faces were shaped not only by genetics, but by the invisible demands of the surrounding environment. Geography quietly pressed against anatomy for thousands of years. Food also transformed the human skull in powerful ways. Ancient diets required far more physical effort than most modern diets. Before agriculture, many people survived on fibrous plants, dried meat, nuts, roots, and other hard foods that demanded constant chewing. Grinding stones sometimes introduced tiny particles of grit into meals, increasing wear on teeth over time. Large jaw muscles developed through daily use, and the bones supporting those muscles responded across generations. This helps explain why many ancient skulls display larger jaws, broader dental arches, and stronger muscle attachment areas than modern skulls. The face reflected the physical labor of eating itself. One of the biggest turning points came with agriculture. Around 12,000 years ago, some human populations gradually shifted toward farming. Grains could be cooked into softer foods. Domesticated animals changed protein sources. Food preparation became more advanced. Over long periods, these changes reduced the physical demands placed on the jaws and teeth. Researchers believe this contributed to smaller facial structures in many agricultural societies. The human skull began changing alongside culture. Ancient skulls, therefore, record not only biology, but also technological and social transformation. Even cooking may have influenced human anatomy more than people realize. Softer food reduced stress on facial muscles, and over many generations the structure of the face slowly responded. Movement patterns mattered too. Ancient hunter-gatherers traveled enormous distances compared to many modern humans. Their lives demanded physical endurance, constant adaptation, and exposure to unpredictable environments. Isolated groups sometimes remained separated for long periods by mountains, deserts, forests, or ice sheets. Over time, certain physical traits became more common within those communities. Human populations did not evolve as one single connected group. They adapted locally to specific pressures and landscapes. Ancient skull variation reflects that deep geographical history. Disease and childhood stress also left subtle marks on human anatomy. Repeated illness during development could affect bone growth and overall skeletal structure. Ancient populations lacked modern medicine and often faced infections that spread rapidly through small communities. Periods of famine or environmental collapse sometimes placed intense pressure on survival. The skull quietly recorded many of those hardships. Looking at ancient faces today means looking at the long physical memory of human adaptation. Every unusual proportion once served a living body trying to survive a particular world. The reason ancient skulls look different is not because ancient humans were less human. It is because human beings have always been shaped by the environments they inhabit. Bone simply preserves that slow conversation between the body and the world around it. Modern people often imagine evolution as something locked in the distant past, as if human beings reached a final form long ago and simply stopped changing. Ancient skulls quietly challenge that belief. The human face has never been fixed. It has always shifted slowly in response to environment, behavior, migration, disease, and culture. Most of these changes happen too gradually for individuals to notice. A person cannot watch their species evolve during a single lifetime. Yet when thousands of years are compressed into museum displays and archaeological timelines, the movement becomes impossible to ignore. Faces changed before recorded history, and evidence suggests they are still changing now. One reason people struggle to accept this idea is because daily life creates the illusion of stability. Parents resemble their children. Communities recognize familiar facial patterns across generations. Human beings naturally focus on short timescales because that is how ordinary experience works. But evolution operates across spans of time far larger than human memory. Ancient skulls from different periods reveal gradual shifts in jaw size, facial width, forehead shape, and bone density. These differences did not appear suddenly. They accumulated through countless small changes passed across generations living under different conditions. The face humans consider normal today is simply the version currently most common in the modern world. Diet has already transformed the human skull dramatically within relatively recent history. Ancient hunter-gatherers often developed broader jaws and stronger chewing muscles because their food demanded intense physical effort. Agriculture softened diets over time. Industrialization softened them even further. Modern humans consume cooked, processed, and mechanically prepared foods unlike anything available to most ancient populations. Researchers studying craniofacial development have suggested that reduced chewing stress during childhood may contribute to smaller jaws in many modern populations. Some scientists even connect softer diets to crowded teeth and the growing frequency of impacted wisdom teeth. The human face continues responding to lifestyle, whether people realize it or not. Technology also changes the way humans interact with their environment. Artificial heating, climate-controlled buildings, advanced medicine, and modern transportation reduce many of the environmental pressures ancient populations faced for thousands of years. In earlier eras, climate could influence survival directly across entire populations. Today, technology often shields people from those pressures. This does not stop human variation, but it changes the kinds of pressures acting on the body. Evolution never truly pauses. The conditions shaping it simply change over time. Migration and global connection are also reshaping human populations in ways very different from the ancient world. For much of human history, some groups remain geographically isolated for long periods. Mountains, deserts, forests, and oceans limited contact. Modern transportation has transformed that pattern dramatically. Populations that once remained separated now mix constantly across continents. Genetic diversity spreads differently than it did in earlier periods. The future human face may emerge from patterns of movement and connection, unlike anything ancient populations experienced. Ancient skulls therefore represent not only the past, but a reminder that humanity is always in transition. The brain itself contributes to this changing story. Human skull shape is partly influenced by the size and organization of the brain inside it. Over evolutionary history, shifts in brain development affected forehead shape, cranial height, and overall skull proportions. Scientists continue studying how these changes unfolded across different human populations. What becomes clear from the evidence is that there was never one perfect or final human skull. Human anatomy remained flexible because survival demanded flexibility. Ancient faces look different because humanity has always adapted to changing worlds. There is something strangely humbling about this realization. People often treat the modern human appearance as natural and permanent because it is familiar, yet ancient skulls reveal how temporary every version of humanity may actually be. Tens of thousands of years from now, future humans may study modern skulls the same way archaeologists study ancient ones today. They may notice features that seem ordinary to us but unusual to them. They may wonder why our jaws look the way they did, or why our faces carried certain proportions connected to environments that no longer exist. The human face is not a finished design. It is a moving record of survival passing slowly through time. Today, it is easy to imagine humanity as a single, uninterrupted story leading directly to the modern world. Most people grow up thinking there was always only one kind of human walking the earth. Ancient skulls reveal a far stranger reality. For long stretches of prehistory, multiple human species and closely related human populations existed at the same time. Some lived in cold northern landscapes. Others survived in tropical forests or open grasslands. Their skulls looked different because they adapted to different worlds, different climates, and different ways of life. The deeper scientists studied ancient remains, the clearer it became that the human story was never simple. Humanity once resembled a branching landscape rather than a straight line. Millions of years ago, early hominins in Africa already displayed wide variation in skull shape and body structure. Some species had smaller brains and projecting faces. Others developed larger cranial capacity and more human-like proportions. Over time, different groups spread into new environments where isolation and adaptation shaped them further. Fossils discovered across Africa, Europe, and Asia revealed a constantly changing network of human relatives rather than one continuous form. Many of these populations overlapped in time. They may have seen each other, competed for resources, or even exchanged knowledge in ways modern science still struggles to reconstruct fully. One of the most famous examples is Homo neanderthalensis, commonly called the Neanderthals. They lived across parts of Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years before disappearing roughly 40,000 years ago. Their skulls differed noticeably from most modern human skulls. Neanderthals often had heavy brow ridges, broad noses, long low brain cases, and powerful jaws. Their bodies were generally more robust as well, likely reflecting adaptation to colder Ice Age environments. Yet despite these differences, Neanderthals were deeply human in many important ways. Archaeological evidence suggests they made tools, controlled fire, cared for injured group members, and possibly created symbolic objects. Ancient skulls helped overturn the old stereotype that they were simple or unintelligent creatures. Another remarkable discovery came from Denisovans, a mysterious ancient human population identified primarily through genetic evidence and a small number of fossil fragments found in Siberia and Asia. Scientists know surprisingly little about exactly what Denisovan skulls looked like because so few remains have been discovered. Yet DNA evidence shows that Denisovans interbred with ancestors of some modern human populations, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania. This means traces of their genetic legacy still survive in living people today. The human story is therefore not only about extinction, but also connection and mixture across ancient populations. Other ancient humans existed as well. Homo erectus survived for an extraordinarily long time and spread across large parts of Africa and Asia. Their skulls typically featured thick cranial bones, prominent brow ridges, and elongated skull shapes. Fossils from species such as Homo heidelbergensis and Homo floresiensis added even more complexity to the picture. Some ancient humans stood close to modern human anatomy, while others retained more ancient traits. There was no single moment when humanity suddenly became fully modern everywhere at once. Different human forms coexisted across enormous spans of time. Ancient skulls preserve evidence of that diversity. What makes these discoveries so unsettling to many people is the realization that modern humans were not always alone. Tens of thousands of years ago, another intelligent human species might have stood beside a fire somewhere in Eurasia, looking into the darkness with thoughts and fears not entirely different from our own. Their skulls looked different, but they were still part of the wider human family. The modern world contains no living equivalent to that experience. Today, Homo sapiens is the only surviving human species. The disappearance of the others can create the illusion that humanity was always singular. Ancient skulls quietly correct that misunderstanding. They remind us that human evolution was filled with diversity, overlap, adaptation, and disappearance. The familiar modern face emerged from a much larger and more crowded world of human forms than most people ever imagine. Few ancient skulls have changed humanity's understanding of itself more than those belonging to the Neanderthals. When their remains were first discovered, many people viewed them as primitive creatures standing somewhere between humans and animals. Their skulls looked too unfamiliar to fit comfortably inside older ideas about human history. Heavy brow ridges stretched above the eyes. The face projected farther forward. The nose appeared broad and large. The skull itself was long and low compared to the rounder shape common in many modern humans today. Early illustrations often exaggerated these features, portraying Neanderthals as hunched, brutish, and barely intelligent. Over time, however, science revealed a far more complex picture. Much of the old image came not from evidence, but from modern bias and misunderstanding. Neanderthal skulls reflected adaptation, not inferiority. Their anatomy developed under environmental pressures very different from those faced by most humans now living. Ice Age Europe was cold, unstable, and physically demanding. Neanderthals survived there for hundreds of thousands of years. Their broad nasal cavities may have helped warm freezing air before it reached the lungs. Their robust bone structure likely supported powerful muscles needed for physically intense daily life. Even their stockier bodies appear connected to heat conservation in cold climates. Ancient skulls preserve these adaptations clearly because bone responds slowly to long-term survival pressures. To modern eyes, the result can seem unfamiliar, but within Neanderthal communities, these faces were completely ordinary. One of the most surprising discoveries about Neanderthals is that their brains were at least as large as those of modern humans, and in some cases slightly larger in average volume. Brain size alone does not measure intelligence, but this fact forced scientists to reconsider earlier assumptions. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals created sophisticated stone tools, controlled fire, hunted large animals, and survived in difficult environments over immense spans of time. Some sites suggest they cared for injured or elderly individuals who could not have survived alone. This implies forms of cooperation and social responsibility that feel deeply human. Ancient skulls showing healed injuries support this interpretation. Individuals with serious physical damage sometimes lived for years afterward, meaning others must have helped them recover. Researchers have also found evidence suggesting Neanderthals may have engaged in symbolic behavior. Pigments, ornaments, and carefully arranged objects discovered at some archaeological sites hint at forms of expression beyond basic survival. Scientists continue debating the extent of Neanderthal symbolic culture, but the older stereotype of a mindless, primitive species has largely collapsed. Ancient skulls, once used to separate Neanderthals from humanity, now help demonstrate how close they actually were to us. Genetics transformed the picture even further. In the 21st century, DNA analysis revealed that Neanderthals and modern humans interbred. Many living people today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA inherited from ancient encounters tens of thousands of years ago. This discovery changed the meaning of those strange skulls forever. Neanderthals were not simply a failed branch disconnected from humanity. They became part of the ancestry of modern populations outside Africa. Their story did not vanish completely. Small traces still survive inside living human bodies. The emotional effect of this realization is difficult to ignore. Ancient skulls, once treated as symbols of otherness, are now recognized as belonging to relatives close enough to leave a genetic legacy within us. Yet Neanderthals eventually disappeared as a distinct population around 40,000 years ago. Scientists still debate exactly why. Climate instability, competition, small population size, disease, and assimilation into modern human groups may all have played roles. There is no single agreed answer. What remains are fragments of bone, tools, traces of fire, and scattered signs of lives once fully lived. Their skulls continue to fascinate modern observers because they stand at the edge of familiarity. Neanderthals looked different enough to challenge human identity, yet similar enough to force uncomfortable recognition. When modern people stare into reconstructed Neanderthal faces, they are not looking at monsters from another world. They are looking at another kind of human that once stood beside our ancestors under the same night sky. For a long time, ancient skulls seem to represent worlds completely disconnected from modern humanity. Museums displayed them as relics of vanished populations, separated from living people by enormous distances in time. The assumption felt simple and comforting. Ancient humans disappeared, modern humans survived, and the story moved forward. Then genetics changed the entire picture. Scientists discovered that extinction is not always complete. Sometimes ancient populations vanish physically while parts of them continue living quietly inside future generations. The skulls remained buried in caves and sediments, but fragments of their biological history survived within modern human DNA. One of the most important breakthroughs came when researchers successfully extracted ancient DNA from Neanderthal bones. This was extraordinarily difficult because genetic material degrades over time. Yet advances in technology eventually allowed scientists to compare Neanderthal DNA with the genomes of living people. The results shocked the scientific world. Most modern populations outside Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal ancestry. Somewhere in the distant past, modern humans and Neanderthals met and had children together. The boundary between ancient species turned out to be far less absolute than many researchers once believed. Ancient skulls no longer represented entirely separate worlds. They became part of the story of living humanity itself. The same pattern appeared again with Denisovans. Very few physical remains of Denisovans have been discovered, making them one of the most mysterious human populations ever identified. Yet genetic evidence revealed that they also contributed DNA to some modern populations, especially among people in parts of Asia and Oceania. In some regions, Denisovan genetic variants may even have helped populations adapt to difficult environments such as high altitudes. This discovery changed the meaning of human evolution profoundly. Ancient populations, once known only through fragments of bone, continued shaping human biology long after their distinct groups disappeared. Their skulls may look strange to modern observers, but traces of their survival remain inside living bodies today. The human story therefore becomes less about replacement and more about mixture, movement, and connection. Different human populations encountered one another repeatedly over tens of thousands of years. Some disappeared entirely, others blended into larger populations. Ancient skulls preserve evidence of diversity, while genetics reveals hidden continuity beneath that diversity. Humanity did not emerge through one isolated line, advancing cleanly toward modern civilization. Instead, the process involved overlapping populations, constantly interacting across changing landscapes. This realization also changed how scientists interpret physical differences in ancient skulls. Earlier generations often treated unusual skull shapes as evidence of complete separation between human groups. Modern research presents a more complicated reality. Distinct populations could look visibly different while still remaining closely related enough to exchange genes. Ancient faces that once seemed impossibly distant from modern humanity now appear connected through deep ancestry. The differences remain real, but so does the biological relationship. There is something emotionally powerful about this discovery. A person today may carry genetic traces inherited from humans whose skulls would appear startlingly unfamiliar in a museum display. Those ancient individuals hunted across Ice Age plains, survived brutal winters, and disappeared tens of thousands of years ago. Yet small fragments of their existence continue inside modern populations. Ancient skulls therefore stop being symbols of complete disappearance. Instead, they become reminders that the past survives in subtle ways the eye cannot immediately see. At the same time, scientists remain careful not to oversimplify these connections. Carrying a small percentage of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA does not mean modern humans are partly less human or divided into separate categories. All living humans belong to the same species, deeply connected through shared ancestry. The discovery of ancient DNA actually reinforces human unity more than separation. It shows how interconnected human populations remained even during prehistoric times. The ancient world was not neatly divided into isolated categories. It was dynamic, fluid, and constantly changing. Ancient skulls look different because human diversity has always existed. But beneath those differences lies a deeper continuity stretching across time. The strange faces of the past are not entirely gone. In quiet and invisible ways, parts of them still travel forward through humanity today. Ancient human skulls often appear heavier, thicker, and more physically powerful than many modern skulls. Large brow ridges, wide jaws, dense facial bones, and broad features can give ancient faces a severe appearance when displayed in museums or scientific illustrations. For a long time, people interpreted these traits as signs of primitiveness, as though ancient humans were somehow unfinished versions of modern humanity. Modern anthropology tells a different story. Those strong facial structures were not mistakes of evolution. In many cases, they were practical responses to lives that demanded far more physical endurance than most modern people experience today. Ancient faces look different because ancient survival required different bodies. Life in prehistoric environments placed enormous strain on the human body. Long before cities, agriculture, or industrial technology existed, humans survived through hunting, gathering, migration, and adaptation to unstable climates. Every day demanded physical effort. Ancient populations traveled across difficult landscapes carrying tools, food, and children. They endured cold, hunger, injury, and constant environmental uncertainty. Under those conditions, the skeleton became shaped by repeated stress over countless generations. Thick bone structure often reflected the demands placed on muscles and connective tissues throughout life. The skull was not isolated from the rest of the body. It formed part of an entire physical system built for survival. One important factor was chewing. Ancient diets required much more force than modern diets. Raw plants, fibrous roots, dried meat, nuts, and coarse grains placed continuous strain on the jaw muscles from childhood onward. Before modern cooking methods and processed foods, eating itself was physically demanding. Strong chewing muscles attached to the skull in ways that gradually influence bone development over long periods of time. Larger jaws and stronger facial bones helped support that constant workload. Ancient skulls preserve evidence of those pressures clearly. Modern humans often forget how dramatically technology has softened daily life, including something as basic as eating. Cold environments likely shaped ancient faces as well. Neanderthals and other populations living during Ice Age conditions often displayed broad faces and large nasal cavities. Researchers believe these features may have helped regulate cold air entering the respiratory system. Freezing air is harsh on delicate lung tissue, especially during heavy physical activity outdoors. Broader nasal passages may have improved warming and humidifying of inhaled air before it reached the lungs. The face therefore functioned partly as environmental equipment. Ancient skulls reveal how closely anatomy responded to climate over enormous spans of time. Even the thickness of bone may reflect aspects of physical adaptation. Ancient humans generally lived lives involving constant movement and physical labor. Hunting with thrusting spears, carrying materials, preparing hides, and surviving exposure to the elements demanded strong muscular systems. The skull provided anchor points for muscles connected to chewing, neck support, and facial movement. Over generations, populations exposed to intense physical demands often developed more robust skeletal traits. Modern humans, living in technologically protected environments, usually experience far less mechanical stress on the body. As lifestyles changed, skull structure gradually changed as well. Yet it is important not to imagine ancient humans as permanently grim or brutal-looking creatures. Museum displays sometimes exaggerate this impression by presenting bare skulls without the softness of living tissue. Skin, facial expression, hair, and movement dramatically affect how a face is perceived. Reconstructions based on scientific evidence often reveal ancient humans who appear more familiar than expected. Their features remain distinct, but their humanity becomes easier to recognize. They were people adapted to demanding environments, not creatures trapped halfway between ape and modern human. Ancient skulls only appear intimidating because modern observers compare them against contemporary expectations shaped by safer and softer lives. In many ways, the human face reflects the conditions under which people survive. Ancient humans needed strong bodies because the world around them was physically unforgiving. Their skulls recorded those demands directly in bone. What modern people often interpret as strangeness was once ordinary anatomy built for endurance, cold, hunger, movement, and resilience. The ancient face was not less human than the modern one. It was simply shaped by a harder world. To understand why ancient skulls look different, it helps to imagine the physical reality of prehistoric life. For most ancient humans, survival depended directly on the body every single day. There were no heated homes during Ice Age winters, no soft packaged food, no metal tools for easy food preparation, and no reliable protection from injury or exposure. The human face evolved inside that difficult world. Every cold season, every tough meal, and every long migration slowly influenced anatomy across generations. Ancient skulls, therefore, preserve not only human biology, but also the memory of ancient environments pressing against the body over immense spans of time. Cold climates were especially important in shaping some ancient human populations. During glacial periods, large parts of Europe and Asia became extremely harsh environments. Temperatures remained low for long stretches, and survival demanded constant adaptation. Researchers studying Neanderthal skulls and other Ice Age populations have noted features that may relate to cold weather breathing. Broad noses and large nasal cavities could help warm and humidify freezing air before it entered the lungs. This process becomes critical during heavy physical activity outdoors. Running, hunting, carrying materials, or traveling through snow while breathing icy air places stress on the respiratory system. The face itself became part of the body's defense against climate. Ancient skulls reveal how survival pressures can shape even the structure surrounding the nose and sinuses. Cold may also have influenced overall facial width. Some scientists suggest broader facial structures helped support larger sinus systems or distributed stress differently under harsh environmental conditions. The exact details remain debated, but researchers generally agree that climate played an important role in shaping ancient anatomy. These were not random features. They developed gradually through populations living under demanding conditions for thousands of years. Food created another powerful influence on the skull. Ancient humans spent much of their lives chewing foods far tougher than those common today. Before advanced cooking and food processing, many meals consisted of raw plants, roots, dried meat, nuts, seeds, and coarse grains. Some foods required long periods of chewing simply to become digestible. In many ancient agricultural societies, grinding stones introduced tiny mineral particles into bread and other foods, slowly wearing down teeth over time. Ancient skulls frequently show severe tooth wear that would seem shocking by modern standards. The muscles controlling the jaw worked constantly, beginning in childhood. Over generations, populations adapted to those demands with larger jaws and stronger attachment points for facial muscles. The skull responded to repeated mechanical stress just as other bones in the body do. Hunting lifestyles also shaped ancient bodies in subtle ways. Prehistoric hunting was physically dangerous and exhausting. Large animals could injure or kill hunters easily. Hunting required endurance, coordination, and intense muscular effort. Ancient humans often carried heavy tools, animal carcasses, and gathered materials over long distances. Neck muscles, shoulder muscles, and facial muscles all formed part of a physically integrated survival system. Stronger skull structures may have helped support these muscular systems under constant use. The face modern people consider harsh or primitive may actually reflect a body adapted for extraordinary physical resilience. Childhood development played an important role as well. Bone responds to stress while growing. Children raised in physically demanding environments developed under conditions very different from those experienced by most modern children. Constant chewing, heavy activity, environmental exposure, and nutritional variation all influence growth patterns over time. Ancient skulls preserve evidence of those developmental pressures long after the individuals themselves disappeared. Modern humans often underestimate how deeply daily behavior shapes anatomy across generations. Even small differences repeated continuously over thousands of years can alter population-wide physical traits. Looking at ancient skulls today can create the illusion that ancient humans belong to a separate world completely disconnected from modern life. In some ways they did. Yet the deeper lesson is more uncomfortable. Human anatomy is far more flexible than people usually imagine. The face changes when survival conditions change. Ancient skulls look stronger because ancient lives demanded strength. Their broad faces, thick bones, and heavy jaws were not strange accidents of evolution. They were practical responses to cold climates, difficult diets, dangerous environments, and physically exhausting ways of living. Bones simply preserved the shape of survival. If ancient humans often had larger faces, heavier brow ridges, and stronger jaws, an important question naturally follows. Why did modern human faces become smaller? The answer is not that humans became weaker in some simple sense. Rather, the world surrounding the human body changed dramatically. Over thousands of years, many of the physical pressures that shaped ancient skulls slowly decreased. Human anatomy responded alongside culture, technology, and lifestyle. The modern face emerged not because evolution aimed toward a more refined appearance, but because survival gradually demanded different things from the body. One of the biggest changes in human history was the development of agriculture. Before farming, most humans lived as hunter-gatherers, eating foods that required intense chewing and constant physical effort to obtain. Early agricultural societies introduced softer and more predictable diets. Grains could be cooked into porridge or bread. Domesticated animals changed how meat was prepared and consumed. Storage methods improved food availability across seasons. Cooking itself became more advanced over time. All of these changes reduced the physical strain placed on the jaws and facial muscles. Ancient skulls show clear evidence of this transition. In many farming populations, faces and jaws gradually became smaller compared to earlier hunter-gatherer groups. Bone responds to use. When certain muscles no longer experience the same levels of stress generation after generation, skeletal structure slowly changes as well. Childhood development played a major role in this process. Modern children in industrialized societies often grow up eating much softer food than ancient humans ever encountered. Processed meals, cooked grains, dairy products, and prepared foods require far less chewing force. Researchers studying craniofacial growth suggest that reduced chewing activity during development may influence jaw size and facial structure. Some scientists believe this contributes to crowded teeth and impacted wisdom teeth in modern populations. Ancient humans often had larger jaws capable of fitting all their teeth more comfortably. Modern jaws became smaller faster than human teeth changed. In a strange way, wisdom teeth may represent an evolutionary echo from a world where human faces were physically larger and stronger. Technology also transformed survival itself. Ancient humans relied directly on physical endurance for warmth, shelter, hunting, and protection. Modern societies increasingly protect the body from environmental pressures. Heated buildings reduce exposure to extreme cold. Machines replace much physical labor. Medical care changes survival patterns. Food preparation eliminates many of the stresses ancient bodies adapted to over thousands of years. The skeleton no longer experiences the same constant demands. As daily life became less physically punishing, some robust skeletal traits gradually became less common. Ancient skulls therefore preserve evidence of worlds where the human body carried much heavier survival burdens than it usually does today. Social behavior may have influenced facial evolution as well. Some researchers suggest that over long periods, human populations developed faces that appeared less physically aggressive. Reduced brow ridges and smaller facial structures may partly reflect changing social dynamics within increasingly cooperative societies. This idea remains debated, but many scientists agree that human evolution involved not only environmental adaptation, but also changes in social interaction. The face communicates emotion, trust, fear, and intention. As human communities became larger and more socially complex, facial expression may have gained increasing importance. Modern human faces are highly expressive, with softer structures that allow subtle emotional communication. Ancient skulls remind us that the human face serves both biological and social functions at the same time. Yet modern faces are not permanent endpoints. Human anatomy continues changing slowly even now. Different populations still display enormous natural variation shaped by ancestry, environment, and development. The modern face simply reflects the current conditions under which most humans live. If those conditions change dramatically over future centuries, the human skull may change again in ways impossible to predict fully. Ancient skulls look powerful because they belong to people surviving physically unforgiving worlds. Modern faces became smaller because technology, agriculture, and culture slowly reduced many of those demands. Neither form is more truly human than the other. They are different chapters within the same unfinished story of adaptation. Among all the differences between ancient skulls and modern ones, the jaws are often the most striking. Many ancient humans had broad dental arches, large teeth, and strong jawbones that appear oversized compared to modern faces. When archaeologists first studied these remains carefully, they noticed that ancient populations frequently showed heavy tooth wear but surprisingly little crowding. Teeth often fit naturally inside the jaw despite years of intense use. In contrast, modern humans commonly experience impacted wisdom teeth, crowded mouths, and orthodontic problems even while eating much softer diets. The difference reveals something important about how dramatically human life has changed. Ancient jaws were shaped by worlds where eating itself demanded strength, endurance, and constant physical effort. For prehistoric humans, the mouth functioned as far more than a tool for speaking or smiling. It was part of survival. Long before industrial food production existed, most meals required serious mechanical work. Raw roots, tough plant fibers, nuts, seeds, dried meat, and coarse grains demanded prolonged chewing. Ancient people often lacked the finely processed foods common today. Even cooked meals could remain rough and difficult to break down completely. Tiny stone particles from grinding tools frequently mixed into food, gradually wearing down teeth over years of use. Ancient skulls preserve this evidence clearly. Many show teeth ground almost flat from decades of chewing abrasive materials. Yet despite this extreme wear, the jaws themselves were often powerful enough to support the stress. Childhood development played a crucial role in shaping these larger jaws. Bone responds dynamically during growth. When children regularly use strong chewing muscles, the surrounding facial bones develop under continuous mechanical pressure. Ancient children likely began eating physically demanding foods at relatively young ages, strengthening the jaw and stimulating wider facial growth patterns over time. Modern children, especially in industrialized societies, grow up consuming much softer foods requiring far less chewing force. Researchers studying craniofacial development suggest that this reduction in jaw activity may contribute to narrower dental arches and smaller jaws today. One especially interesting clue to this changing history is the modern wisdom tooth. Wisdom teeth are third molars that usually emerge during late adolescence or early adulthood. In many modern people, there is not enough room in the jaw for them to erupt properly. This often leads to pain, infection, or surgical removal. Ancient skulls, however, frequently show enough jaw space for wisdom teeth to fit naturally. Researchers believe this difference reflects the gradual reduction of jaw size over time. Human diets soften much faster than tooth number changed evolutionarily. The modern mouth may therefore represent a kind of anatomical mismatch between ancient genetic inheritance and modern lifestyles. In a quiet way, wisdom teeth still carry echoes of prehistoric faces built for harder worlds. Ancient jaws also remind scientists that evolution does not move toward perfection. Human anatomy changes according to environmental conditions, not according to some ideal design. Large ancient jaws were useful under physically demanding survival conditions. Smaller modern jaws reflect different lifestyles shaped by agriculture, cooking, technology, and industrial society. Neither is superior in an absolute sense. They simply belong to different chapters of human adaptation. When people stare at ancient skulls and notice those broad jaws and worn teeth, they are seeing evidence of lives where survival passed directly through the mouth itself. Bone remembered every meal, every season of hunger, and every year of physical strain. For most of human history, people survived by hunting animals, gathering plants, and constantly adapting to unpredictable environments. Then, beginning roughly 12,000 years ago in several parts of the world, something slowly changed. Humans started planting crops, storing food, and living in more permanent settlements. Agriculture transformed civilization in ways that are easy to recognize today. Villages grew into cities, population sizes increased. Written history eventually appeared. Yet one of the quieter changes happened directly inside the human face. Ancient skulls reveal that farming did not simply change society, it gradually changed human anatomy as well. Before agriculture, most food demanded intense physical effort to chew. Hunter-gatherer diets often included fibrous roots, wild plants, dried meat, nuts, and other coarse materials. Even cooked food remained relatively tough compared to modern meals. Daily chewing placed continuous stress on the jaw muscles and surrounding facial bones. Over generations, this contributed to broader jaws and larger dental arches. Ancient skulls from hunter-gatherer populations frequently show strong facial structures with enough space for teeth to fit naturally. Tooth wear was often severe, but crowded mouths were less common than they are today. The physical demands of eating helped shape the growing face from childhood onward. Farming slowly altered that pattern. Grains such as wheat, rice, and barley could be cooked into softer foods like porridge and bread. Domesticated animals changed protein sources and food preparation methods. As agricultural societies developed more advanced cooking techniques, meals became easier to chew. Over long periods of time, the muscles involved in chewing no longer experienced the same levels of strain generation after generation. Researchers studying ancient skulls have found evidence that jaw size gradually decreased in many farming populations. The face itself became smaller as human lifestyles became less physically demanding in certain ways. This change did not happen instantly. It unfolded across thousands of years as culture reshaped biology. Childhood development remained especially important. Bone grows in response to repeated mechanical pressure during early life. Children raised on softer diets often develop narrower jaws than those who regularly chew tougher foods. Scientists continue debating every detail, but many researchers believe reduced chewing activity contributes to smaller modern facial structures. This may help explain why orthodontic crowding has become so common in industrialized societies. Ancient hunter-gatherer skulls often display wider dental arches capable of fitting all teeth comfortably. Modern humans frequently require braces or surgical removal of wisdom teeth because the jaw no longer provides enough space. The modern face may therefore reflect a mismatch between ancient genetic inheritance and increasingly soft modern lifestyles. Agriculture also changed human health in more complicated ways. Farming supported larger populations, but early agricultural diets were sometimes less nutritionally varied than hunter-gatherer diets. In some regions, reliance on a small number of staple crops increased vulnerability to nutritional deficiencies and disease. Ancient skeletons from early farming communities occasionally show signs of stress, malnutrition, or dental decay, becoming more common. Softer carbohydrate-rich foods created new conditions for tooth damage. Ancient skulls preserve this transition clearly. The shift toward agriculture did not simply improve life in every respect. It introduced new biological pressures while removing others. Human anatomy adjusted slowly alongside those changes. Another important difference involved lifestyle and movement. Hunter-gatherers generally lived highly active lives, requiring constant travel and physical endurance. Agricultural societies became more settled. The body no longer adapted primarily to migration across large landscapes. Daily physical activity changed. Work remained demanding, but in different ways connected to farming, storage, and settlement life. Over many generations, the entire human body responded to this transformed relationship with the environment. The skull became one visible part of that larger transition. Looking at ancient skulls today allows scientists to trace this slow transformation across time. Faces shifted not because evolution aimed toward modern appearance, but because human culture altered the conditions shaping growth and survival. The smaller jaws and softer facial structures common today are deeply connected to agriculture, cooking, and technological change. In a quiet sense, every modern human face still carries the long biological memory of the moment humanity stopped wandering and began planting fields. Among the many changes hidden inside ancient skulls, few are as personal to modern humans as the story of wisdom teeth. Millions of people experience pain, crowding, or surgery connected to these teeth during adolescence or early adulthood. In many modern societies, wisdom tooth removal has become almost routine. Yet ancient skulls often show something very different. Archaeologists regularly find ancient jaws where all four wisdom teeth erupted naturally without severe crowding. The contrast raises a quiet but fascinating question. If wisdom teeth once fit normally inside human mouths, why do they create so many problems today? The answer reveals how rapidly human lifestyles changed compared to the slower pace of human evolution. Wisdom teeth are the third set of molars located at the back of the jaw. For ancient humans, these teeth were useful additions to a mouth constantly exposed to heavy wear. Teeth gradually eroded from years of chewing coarse foods filled with tough fibers, dried meat, grit, and stone particles from grinding tools. By early adulthood, many ancient people already showed significant tooth wear. Extra molars provided additional chewing surfaces that helped maintain the ability to process food throughout life. In physically demanding prehistoric environments, losing chewing efficiency could become dangerous. The larger jaws common in many ancient populations usually provided enough room for these extra teeth to emerge naturally. Ancient skulls preserve this pattern clearly across many regions and time periods. Modern humans inherited the same basic dental blueprint from those ancestors, but the surrounding anatomy gradually changed. As diets softened through agriculture, cooking, and industrial food processing, jaw size slowly decreased in many populations. Children growing up on softer foods generally used their chewing muscles less intensely than ancient humans. Researchers studying facial development believe this reduced mechanical stress may contribute to narrower jaws during growth. Over many generations, the human face became smaller, while the total number of teeth often remained the same. The result created a kind of biological crowding problem. Wisdom teeth still attempt to emerge according to ancient developmental patterns, but modern jaws frequently lack enough space to accommodate them comfortably. Ancient skulls, therefore, reveal an important truth about evolution. The human body does not redesign itself instantly when lifestyles change. Evolution works gradually, generation after generation, often leaving traces of older adaptations behind. Wisdom teeth may represent one of the clearest examples of this process visible in everyday modern life. They are not useless mistakes. They once served practical purposes inside larger prehistoric jaws shaped by physically demanding diets. The problems associated with them today reflect the speed at which human culture transformed food and lifestyle compared to the slower pace of anatomical adaptation. Scientists continue debating whether humans are slowly evolving toward fewer wisdom teeth altogether. Some people are already born missing one or more wisdom teeth naturally. Genetic variation affecting tooth development exists across populations. Over extremely long periods, traits reducing problematic tooth eruption could potentially become more common. Yet evolution never follows a simple plan. Different populations experience different pressures, and modern medicine also changes survival patterns in ways ancient humans never encountered. The future of the human jaw remains uncertain. What ancient skulls show clearly, however, is that modern anatomy still carries deep connections to prehistoric life. There is something strangely intimate about this realization. A person sitting in a modern dental office may unknowingly be experiencing the consequences of evolutionary history stretching back tens of thousands of years. Pain in the jaw today can reflect anatomical patterns shaped during eras when humans hunted across frozen landscapes and survived on hard, abrasive foods. Ancient skulls stop feeling distant when viewed this way. Their broad jaws and naturally erupted wisdom teeth are not merely scientific curiosities. They are reminders that the modern human face still contains echoes of older worlds. The body remembers where it came from, even when the environment surrounding it has changed completely. Wisdom teeth are small pieces of prehistoric history still hidden inside modern mouths. For most of modern history, humans have lived in a world connected by ships, roads, aircraft, and digital communication. Faces from distant regions can now appear instantly on screens across the planet. It is easy to forget how isolated human populations once were. For thousands of years, mountains, deserts, forests, oceans, and ice sheets separated communities from one another. Some groups lived for generations with little outside contact. Ancient skulls preserve evidence of this isolation in remarkable detail. Over long stretches of time, populations adapting to different environments slowly developed distinctive facial structures and skull shapes. These differences did not appear because isolated people stopped being human. They appeared because human biology responds continuously to geography, climate, diet, and genetic inheritance. Isolation allowed those small differences to accumulate more visibly across generations. One of the clearest examples comes from island populations. Islands often create unusual evolutionary conditions because movement in and out becomes limited. Small populations living in relative isolation can develop distinctive physical traits over time, simply through a combination of adaptation and genetic drift. Genetic drift occurs when certain traits become more common in smaller populations, partly by chance rather than direct survival advantage alone. Ancient skulls from isolated island communities sometimes display unique combinations of facial proportions not commonly seen elsewhere. Scientists studying these remains are careful not to exaggerate the differences, but the patterns help reveal how flexible human anatomy can become when populations remain separated across long periods. Mountains created another powerful form of isolation. Human groups living in remote highland regions often experienced limited contact with neighboring populations for centuries or longer. Harsh climates, difficult travel routes, and thin air shaped both daily life and biology. Researchers studying ancient populations from mountainous areas have found evidence of adaptations connected to breathing efficiency and endurance at high altitudes. While many of these changes occur internally rather than visibly in the skull, facial anatomy could still reflect environmental pressures tied to climate and oxygen levels. Geography quietly guided human development by controlling who interacted, who migrated, and who remained separated. Deserts and forests also divided populations in important ways. In prehistoric times, crossing large deserts or dense forests could be extremely dangerous. Small human groups sometimes remained isolated, simply because movement between regions was difficult to sustain regularly. Over generations, distinct facial characteristics could become more common within certain populations due to shared ancestry, local adaptation, and reduced outside mixing. Ancient skulls preserve traces of those long periods of separation. The human face became partly shaped by where people could and could not travel. Yet isolation did not create completely separate kinds of humans. This point is extremely important. Ancient skull variation reflects normal human diversity shaped by environment and history. not rigid biological categories. Modern genetics shows that all human populations remain deeply connected through shared ancestry. Differences in skull shape between ancient groups were often gradual and overlapping rather than sharply divided. Human populations have always mixed, migrated, and exchanged genes at different points throughout history. Even isolated groups were rarely isolated forever. New migrations, climate shifts, trade routes, and changing environments repeatedly brought populations back into contact. Ancient skulls therefore record movement as much as separation. There is something quietly profound about this. A mountain range or ocean could slowly influence the shape of human faces simply by limiting contact between communities over enough generations. Geography itself became part of human evolution. The world outside the body shaped the body from generation to generation without anyone fully realizing it was happening. Ancient people living in isolated valleys or remote islands would not have thought of themselves as biologically unusual. Their faces looked ordinary within their own communities. Only thousands of years later, when archaeologists compare skulls across distant regions and time periods, do these subtle patterns become visible. Ancient skulls remind us that humanity has always adapted locally to specific worlds while still remaining part of one connected species. The face carries traces of those ancient landscapes even long after the landscapes themselves have changed. When scientists compare ancient skulls from different regions of the world, certain patterns begin to appear. Populations living in cold northern climates often show different facial proportions from populations that lived for thousands of years in hot deserts, humid forests, or high mountain regions. These differences can seem dramatic when skulls are displayed side by side in museums. Yet the deeper scientific lesson is not that ancient humans belong to separate kinds of humanity. It is that the human body responds slowly and continuously to local environments. Climate, altitude, food availability, disease exposure, and isolation all influenced anatomy over immense stretches of time. Ancient skulls preserve the memory of those environmental pressures in bone. One of the most studied features is the nose region. Researchers examining populations from colder climates have often observed broader nasal openings and larger internal nasal cavities. Scientists believe these structures may have helped warm and humidify freezing air before it entered the lungs. Cold, dry air can damage delicate respiratory tissues, especially during constant outdoor activity. In colder environments, facial anatomy that improved breathing efficiency may gradually have become more common over generations. In warmer and more humid climates, different pressures acted on the respiratory system. Some populations developed narrower nasal structures associated with different patterns of heat and moisture regulation. These changes were not conscious adaptations made by individuals. They accumulated gradually through population-level evolutionary processes unfolding over thousands of years. Facial width also varied between ancient populations living under different environmental conditions. Some colder climate groups displayed broader mid-facial regions, while populations in other regions often showed narrower facial structures. Scientists continue debating exactly how much climate influenced these patterns compared to genetics and population history. Human anatomy is shaped by many overlapping factors at once. Still, ancient skulls consistently reveal that the environment left visible marks on the human face. The body adapted locally to the demands of breathing, temperature regulation, nutrition, and physical activity. Geography quietly shaped anatomy without creating absolute divisions between human groups. Diet remained another major influence. Populations relying heavily on tough plant foods, dried meats, or abrasive grains often developed stronger jaws and more robust facial structures due to the mechanical demands of chewing. Meanwhile, groups with access to softer foods sometimes showed somewhat smaller facial proportions over time. Ancient skulls, therefore, preserve evidence not only of climate, but also of local lifestyles and subsistence strategies. Two human populations living in very different environments could gradually develop noticeable physical differences while still belonging fully to the same species. This point becomes especially important because history contains many examples of people misinterpreting skull variation. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, some researchers wrongly treated differences in skull shape as proof that certain human groups were fundamentally separate or unequal. Modern science rejects those ideas. Human variation is real, but it exists within one deeply interconnected species. Genetic evidence shows that all modern humans share remarkably recent common ancestry compared to most other animals. Ancient skulls reflect adaptation, migration, and local history rather than rigid biological categories. The boundaries between populations have always been fluid rather than absolute. Human groups repeatedly mixed and migrated throughout history. Even populations that remained isolated for long periods eventually encountered others through movement, trade, climate shifts, or expansion into new territories. Ancient skulls often display overlapping features that resist simple classification. Some populations combine traits associated with multiple regions, because humanity has never evolved in neatly separated boxes. The farther scientists study ancient remains, the clearer this complexity becomes. Human diversity reflects constant motion rather than permanent separation. There is something strangely comforting in that realization. Ancient skulls may look different from one another, but the differences emerge through ordinary biological responses to ordinary survival challenges, repeated over immense spans of time. The same human species adapted to frozen plains, tropical forests, mountain valleys, coastlines, and deserts. The face changed because the world around it changed. Yet beneath those differences remained the same basic human capacities for emotion, cooperation, fear, memory, and survival. Ancient skulls remind us that humanity has always been both diverse and connected at the same time. Ancient skulls can easily create the illusion that humanity was once divided into clearly separate types of people. When skulls from different regions are placed beside one another, the variations in brow ridges, jaw size, facial width, or cranial shape can appear dramatic to the modern eye. Throughout history, some people misused these differences to claim that certain human groups were naturally superior, inferior, or fundamentally separate from others. Modern science has shown how deeply flawed those ideas were. Ancient skull variation reflects adaptation, migration, environment, and shared ancestry unfolding over time. It does not support rigid divisions of human worth or intelligence. In fact, the deeper scientists study ancient humans, the more connected humanity appears. During the 19th century, some researchers attempted to rank human populations by skull measurements. They measured cranial size, facial angles, and bone proportions while assuming these traits revealed intelligence or moral value. These practices, often grouped under ideas such as scientific racism or craniometry, were shaped more by social prejudice than reliable science. Researchers frequently began with biased conclusions and then searched for measurements to support them. Ancient skulls became tools used to justify colonialism, discrimination, and unequal treatment. Modern anthropology now recognizes that those interpretations misunderstood both evolution and human variation. Skull shape alone cannot determine intelligence, character, or human value. Human anatomy reflects many overlapping biological and environmental influences rather than simple hierarchies. Genetics transformed scientific understanding dramatically. Studies of modern human DNA reveal that all living humans are extraordinarily similar at the genetic level. Most genetic variation exists within populations rather than between them. Human groups have repeatedly mixed and migrated throughout history, preventing the formation of sharply separated biological categories. Ancient skulls may preserve regional differences shaped by climate or isolation, but those differences remain small within the larger context of shared humanity. Modern populations are deeply interconnected through common ancestry, extending back through prehistoric migrations. The old idea of isolated, pure human types does not match the evidence preserved in genetics or archaeology. Ancient skulls themselves often resist simple classification. Many archaeological discoveries contain combinations of traits once assumed to belong to separate groups. Some skulls show broad faces alongside more delicate features. Others combine characteristics associated with different regions or populations. Human variation forms gradual transitions rather than rigid boundaries. Scientists studying ancient remains now focus more carefully on population history, migration patterns, environmental adaptation, and genetic relationships instead of forcing skulls into narrow categories. The farther research advances, the more human complexity replaces older simplistic theories. Climate and geography explain many differences once misunderstood as evidence of separation. Populations living for thousands of years in cold northern environments adapted differently from populations surviving in tropical forests or desert regions. Diet, altitude, disease exposure, and local conditions all influence skeletal development over long periods. Ancient skulls preserve those local histories in bone, yet adaptation to environment never changed the basic fact that all these populations belong to humanity. Different faces reflected different worlds, not different levels of humanity. There is also an emotional reason ancient skulls can be misinterpreted. Human beings instinctively notice unfamiliar faces. The brain quickly recognizes patterns that appear different from what it sees every day. Ancient skulls often exaggerate this effect because soft tissue is gone, leaving only bone behind. Without skin, expression, or movement, differences in structure can appear more extreme than they would in living faces. Modern facial reconstructions based on ancient skulls often reveal individuals who look far more relatable and human than people expect. The distance between ancient and modern humanity becomes smaller once flesh, emotion, and ordinary human expression return to the face. Perhaps the most important lesson ancient skulls teach is humility. Human appearance changes over time because humans adapt to changing worlds. No modern population represents a final or superior version of humanity. Every face alive today emerged from long histories of migration, survival, mixture, and adaptation stretching back through countless generations. Ancient skulls remind us that difference is normal within the human story. Diversity did not weaken humanity. It helped humanity survive across deserts, ice fields, mountains, forests, and coastlines over immense stretches of time. The face changed again and again, but the deeper human connection remained. Some ancient skulls did more than confuse scientists. They changed entire ideas about what it meant to be human. Again and again, archaeology uncovered remains that refused to fit neatly into existing explanations of human history. A skull would appear with features too unusual to classify easily. The face might seem partly modern and partly ancient at the same time. The brain case might resemble one population while the jaw resembled another. Each discovery forced scientists to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Human evolution was far more complicated than anyone originally imagined. Ancient skulls became puzzles that challenged the belief that humanity followed a simple, orderly path from primitive to modern. One of the earliest and most famous examples was the discovery of the Neanderthal remains in Germany during the 19th century. At the time, many scholars could not accept that another human species had once existed. The skull looked too unfamiliar. Heavy brow ridges, thick bones, and unusual proportions seemed incompatible with the traditional image of humanity. Some researchers claimed the bones belonged to a diseased modern human rather than an ancient population. Others argued the skull came from a deformed individual. The deeper problem was psychological as much as scientific. Accepting the skull meant accepting that humanity itself had changed over time. That idea challenged long-standing assumptions about permanence and human uniqueness. Similar debates followed other discoveries. Fossils found in Java and China during the late 19th and early 20th centuries revealed ancient humans later classified as Homo erectus. Their skulls displayed long, low brain cases and prominent brow ridges unlike those of most living humans. Once again, scientists struggled to interpret what they were seeing. Some viewed these remains as transitional forms between earlier hominins and modern humans. Others disagreed sharply about how closely related these populations truly were to modern humanity. Ancient skulls repeatedly exposed the limits of existing scientific categories. Each new discovery complicated the story rather than simplifying it. One especially fascinating case emerged from the island of Flores in Indonesia. In 2003, researchers uncovered the remains of a small-bodied ancient human population, later nicknamed the Hobbits, because of their unusual size. These remains, often associated with Homo floresiensis, created immediate controversy. The skull and skeleton appeared unlike any known modern human population. Some scientists proposed the remains belonged to a previously unknown human species adapted to island life. Others argued the individuals may have suffered from developmental disorders or disease. Debate continued for years because the fossils combined traits that seemed both ancient and unexpectedly recent. Ancient skulls once again refused to fit comfortably inside established explanations. The Denisovans created an even stranger scientific mystery. Unlike Neanderthals, Very few Denisovan fossils have been discovered. Scientists first identified them primarily through DNA extracted from a finger bone and teeth found in Siberia. Genetic evidence revealed that this population was distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans, yet also closely related enough to interbreed with them. Researchers realized that an entire branch of ancient humanity had remained almost invisible in the fossil record. In this case, the absence of skulls became part of the mystery itself. Human history proved capable of hiding entire populations for tens of thousands of years. Ancient skulls also forced scientists to reconsider older assumptions about migration. Some discoveries revealed modern-looking humans existing earlier than expected in certain regions. Others suggested overlapping populations living side by side rather than replacing one another cleanly. The more fossils researchers uncovered, the less human evolution resembled a straight ladder. Instead, it began to look more like a branching network filled with migration, isolation, adaptation, mixture, and extinction occurring simultaneously across different regions. There is something deeply human about these scientific struggles. Researchers were not simply classifying bones, they were confronting the possibility that humanity never possessed a single stable form. Ancient skulls unsettled people because they blurred boundaries once assumed to be clear. The face modern humans recognize as familiar turned out to be only one version within a much larger and more complicated human story. Every strange skull pulled from the earth carried the same quiet message. Humanity has always been more diverse, more adaptable, and more mysterious than it first appears. As ancient skulls began appearing across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas during the 19th century, many scientists believed they could divide humanity into clear biological categories simply by measuring bone. The skull became treated almost like a map of human value. Researchers measured forehead angles, cranial volume, jaw projection, facial width, and countless other features while attempting to rank different populations according to intelligence, morality, or evolutionary advancement. Today, these ideas are recognized as deeply flawed. Yet for a long period, skull science shaped politics, education, colonialism, and public beliefs about human difference. Ancient skulls were not only misunderstood, they were often used to support conclusions people already wanted to believe. One major problem was the assumption that physical variation automatically reflected fixed mental or moral differences. Researchers collected skulls from around the world and compared them as though humanity could be neatly divided into superior and inferior groups. Many scientists approached their work with strong cultural biases rooted in the societies they lived in. European populations were often treated as the standard of advanced humanity, while other groups were unfairly portrayed as primitive based on selective interpretations of skull measurements. Ancient skulls with heavy brow ridges or broad faces were frequently described using language associated with savagery or intellectual inferiority. These interpretations revealed more about the prejudices of the observers than the people whose skulls were being studied. Craniometry became especially influential during the 19th century. Researchers attempted to measure skull capacity under the assumption that larger brains automatically indicated greater intelligence. Some scientists even filled skulls with seeds or pellets to estimate internal volume. Yet these studies ignored enormous biological complexity. Brain size alone does not determine intelligence, creativity, emotional depth, or social behavior. Modern neuroscience recognizes that cognitive ability depends on highly complex interactions involving brain structure, organization, development, environment, nutrition, education, and culture. Ancient skulls cannot reveal human worth through simple measurements. The earlier attempts to reduce humanity to numbers created misleading conclusions that harmed millions of people. These ideas blended dangerously with political ideologies. Colonial powers sometimes used skull measurements to justify conquest and unequal treatment of populations they considered biologically inferior. In the 20th century, distorted interpretations of human biology influenced racist laws, forced sterilization programs, and eugenics movements in several countries. Ancient skulls became symbols inside arguments about who counted as fully civilized or fully human. Science itself was not the problem. The problem came from allowing cultural prejudice to shape scientific interpretation. Researchers often ignored evidence that contradicted their assumptions while emphasizing details that supported existing social hierarchies. Over time, anthropology changed profoundly. Improved fossil discoveries, genetics, archaeology, and population biology revealed a far more complicated picture of humanity. Scientists realized that human variation does not divide cleanly into rigid biological races. Most variation exists gradually across populations rather than forming sharp boundaries. Ancient humans repeatedly migrated, mixed, adapted, and exchanged genes throughout history. Skull shape reflects ancestry, environment, development, nutrition, and random variation interacting together over long periods. No single feature can determine intelligence, value, or superiority. Ancient skulls preserve adaptation and history, not moral ranking systems. One especially important shift came from genetics. DNA studies demonstrated that all modern humans share remarkably recent common ancestry. Human populations are far more genetically similar than earlier scientists assumed. Traits such as skin color, facial structure, or skull shape represent relatively small variations within one interconnected species. Ancient skulls that once seemed to support division now help reveal connection instead. The farther science advanced, the less stable old racial categories became. There is an uncomfortable lesson hidden inside this history. Human beings often want simple categories because they create the illusion of certainty. Ancient skulls disrupted that certainty repeatedly. Some fossils appeared too modern for their age. Others combined unexpected traits from different populations. Many refused to fit neatly into predefined boxes. Modern anthropology became more cautious, partly because earlier scientists learned how dangerous oversimplified classification could become. Ancient skulls continue teaching that humanity has never existed in rigid, permanent categories. The human story is one of movement, overlap, adaptation, and shared ancestry unfolding across time. Bone records difference, but it also records connection. Modern science studies ancient skulls very differently from the way researchers approached them a century ago. Earlier generations often searched for simple answers hidden inside bone. They wanted to know which human group came first, which was more advanced, or where clear boundaries between populations existed. Ancient skulls were treated almost like fixed labels that could sort humanity into stable categories. Over time, scientists discovered that human evolution was far too complicated for such simple systems. The deeper researchers looked, the more overlap, mixture, and uncertainty they found. Modern anthropology became more cautious because ancient humans repeatedly refused to fit into neat explanations. One of the biggest changes came through DNA analysis. Before genetics, scientists relied heavily on visible anatomy alone. Skull shape, jaw size, brow ridges, and cranial proportions formed the main evidence used to reconstruct human history. But physical appearance can sometimes mislead researchers. Different populations may develop similar features independently because they adapt to similar environments. Meanwhile, closely related populations can look surprisingly different after long periods of isolation or local adaptation. Ancient skulls provide valuable information, but they reveal only part of the story. DNA opened an entirely new window into the past. When researchers first succeeded in extracting ancient DNA from fossil remains, it transformed anthropology almost immediately. Scientists could now compare genetic relationships directly, rather than relying only on external anatomy. Some ancient populations once believed completely separate turned out to be closely related. Other groups that appeared physically similar proved genetically distinct in important ways. Neanderthals became one of the clearest examples. Earlier, scientists debated whether they belonged inside the human family at all. DNA later revealed that Neanderthals interbred with modern humans, leaving traces still present in living populations today. Ancient skulls that once symbolized separation became evidence of connection instead. Denisovans changed the picture even more dramatically. Scientists identified them primarily through genetic evidence extracted from tiny fossil fragments rather than complete skulls. An entire ancient human population had existed almost invisibly in the fossil record. Without DNA technology, researchers might never have realized how important Denisovans were in human evolutionary history. This discovery reminded scientists that the archaeological record is incomplete. Countless ancient humans lived and died without leaving fossils that survived into the modern world. The absence of skulls does not necessarily mean the absence of populations. Human history contains hidden chapters still waiting to be discovered. Modern researchers also study ancient skulls with greater awareness of environmental and developmental influences. Earlier scientists sometimes assumed skull shape reflected fixed biological categories. Today, anthropology recognizes that climate, nutrition, disease, physical activity, childhood growth, and local adaptation all influence anatomy. A skull is not simply a genetic blueprint frozen in bone. It is the product of a life lived within specific environmental conditions. Ancient humans from cold regions often developed different facial proportions than humans from tropical climates, because their bodies adapted to different survival pressures. Understanding those influences requires caution rather than oversimplified conclusions. Technology continues changing how ancient skulls are studied. High-resolution scanning allows researchers to examine internal bone structures without damaging fragile fossils. Computer modeling helps reconstruct missing fragments and simulate muscle attachment patterns. Chemical analysis can reveal clues about ancient diets and migration histories. Even microscopic wear on teeth can provide information about food preparation and daily behavior. Ancient skulls are no longer studied as isolated objects. Scientists combine evidence from genetics, archaeology, climate research, geology, and biomechanics to build more complete pictures of ancient lives. Yet despite all this technology, uncertainty remains an important part of modern anthropology. Researchers now recognize how easy it is to misinterpret limited evidence. A single skull cannot automatically explain an entire population. A fossil discovery may completely change previous theories overnight. Human evolution no longer appears as a straight line leading cleanly toward modern humanity. Instead, it resembles a tangled network of migrations, adaptations, extinctions, and encounters unfolding across immense stretches of time. Ancient skulls still fascinate scientists because they preserve fragments of that enormous story. But modern research approaches them with more humility than before. The farther humanity looks into the past, the more difficult it becomes to separate certainty from mystery. There is a strange feeling many people experience when they look at ancient skulls for the first time. The reaction is difficult to describe clearly. Part of it is curiosity. Part of it is discomfort. Ancient human skulls often appear familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The eye recognizes something undeniably human in the shape of the face, the position of the eyes, the curve of the jaw. Yet certain features feel distant enough to create unease. Heavy brow ridges, broad cheekbones, large jaws, or elongated skulls can make ancient faces seem almost like reflections from another version of humanity. This emotional tension may explain why ancient skulls fascinate people so deeply across cultures and generations. Human beings are naturally sensitive to faces. The brain is highly specialized for recognizing facial patterns, expressions, and emotional signals. Even slight changes in facial structure can influence how a face is perceived emotionally. Ancient skulls remove all the soft features modern humans rely on when recognizing one another. There is no skin, eye movement, expression, or voice remaining. Only bone survives. Without those familiar social signals, the mind focuses intensely on structural differences that might feel much less dramatic in living people. A Neanderthal reconstruction with skin, hair, and eyes often appears surprisingly relatable. The bare skull alone, however, can feel unsettling because it strips away the emotional familiarity modern humans expect from faces. Part of the discomfort may come from uncertainty about identity itself. Modern people tend to think of humanity as stable and recognizable. Ancient skulls quietly challenge that assumption. They reveal that human appearance has changed repeatedly across time. The modern face is not permanent or inevitable. It is only one moment within a much longer evolutionary process. Looking at ancient skulls can create the unsettling realization that humanity once included faces very different from those common today. Some ancient humans look close enough to modern people to feel familiar, yet different enough to force difficult questions about what truly defines a human being. There may also be a deeper psychological reason ancient skulls affect people so strongly. They confront modern humans with both ancestry and mortality at the same time. A skull is already a symbol closely associated with death in many cultures. An ancient skull adds another layer to that symbolism. It represents a real person who lived, feared, suffered, and disappeared thousands of years ago. Yet traces of that life remain preserved in bone. Looking into the empty eye sockets of an ancient skull can create a powerful awareness of time itself. Entire worlds vanished, climates changed, populations disappeared, and still the shape of a human face survived long enough to be seen again by strangers in the distant future. Museums often intensify this emotional effect. Ancient skulls are usually displayed under artificial lighting inside silent rooms separated from ordinary life. Labels describe dates stretching back tens or hundreds of thousands of years. The mind struggles to connect such enormous spans of time with something as intimate as a face. A skull may belong to someone who lived before agriculture, before cities, before written language, yet their basic human features remain recognizable. This creates a strange emotional contradiction. Ancient humans feel distant and close at the same time. Facial reconstructions make this feeling even stronger. Modern forensic techniques allow scientists and artists to rebuild ancient faces using skull structure, muscle attachment patterns, and anatomical averages. When viewers see reconstructed ancient humans with skin, eyes, and expression, many are surprised by how ordinary they can appear. The emotional distance suddenly shrinks. Ancient people stop looking like abstract prehistoric creatures and begin resembling individuals who could almost exist in the modern world. This shift can feel deeply moving because it restores humanity to bones that once seemed alien. Perhaps this is why ancient skulls continue to hold such power over human imagination. They do not merely reveal scientific information about evolution or anatomy. They force modern people to confront difficult truths about change, survival, and identity. The face modern humans recognize as normal is temporary. Humanity has worn many faces before, and it may wear different ones again in the future. Ancient skulls sit silently between familiarity and mystery, reminding people that the human story is far older and stranger than everyday life usually allows us to notice. Ancient skulls often appear strange when displayed alone in museums. Without skin, eyes, hair, or expression, the face becomes reduced to structure and bone. Heavy brow ridges seem harsher. Large jaws appear more intimidating. Deep eye sockets create an impression of emptiness rather than personality. Yet something remarkable happens when scientists reconstruct ancient faces using modern forensic techniques. Once soft tissue is added back onto the skull, many ancient humans suddenly begin to look unexpectedly familiar. The emotional distance shrinks. What once appeared alien starts resembling an ordinary person from another time. This transformation reveals how strongly human perception depends on expression and social recognition rather than bone alone. Facial reconstruction combines anatomy, archaeology, and artistic interpretation. Scientists begin with the skull itself, studying muscle attachment points, bone thickness, facial proportions, and known anatomical patterns. Tissue depth markers are placed on specific parts of the skull based on averages from modern populations. Muscles, fat, skin, and facial features are gradually rebuilt layer by layer. Researchers also use clues from genetics when possible. Ancient DNA can sometimes provide information about hair color, eye color, or skin pigmentation. The result is never a perfect photograph of the past, but a scientifically informed approximation of how a person may have appeared in life. What surprises many viewers is how emotionally recognizable these reconstructed faces can feel. A Neanderthal reconstruction might show tired eyes, weathered skin, or a thoughtful expression. Suddenly, the skull no longer represents a distant prehistoric category. It resembles an individual. The mind stops focusing only on structural differences and begins recognizing familiar human signals instead. Ancient humans start looking less like creatures from another world and more like people shaped by different environments and histories. This reaction reveals something important about how humans perceive one another. Small changes in expression, posture, and soft tissue dramatically affect whether a face feels approachable or strange. Bare skulls exaggerate differences because they remove the emotional features modern humans instinctively search for during social interaction. The living face contains movement, emotion, and personality layered over bone. Once those elements return through reconstruction, ancient people often become easier to recognize emotionally. Viewers may notice expressions resembling exhaustion, sadness, curiosity, or calmness. The ancient face regains humanity, There is also a deeper psychological effect at work. Facial reconstructions collapse time in a way ancient skulls alone often do not. Looking at a skull can feel abstract and distant because the person behind it seems unreachable. A reconstructed face changes that relationship. Suddenly, the viewer may imagine conversations, emotions, fears, or ordinary moments from a life thousands of years gone. Ancient humans stop existing purely as scientific evidence and begin feeling emotionally real. This is one reason reconstructed faces often create strong reactions in museums and documentaries. They restore individuality to people history almost erased completely. Yet reconstructions also involve uncertainty. Many features cannot be known precisely from bone alone. Hairstyles, skin texture, body weight, and subtle facial details require informed interpretation. Different artists may produce somewhat different versions of the same ancient individual. Scientists remain careful to explain that reconstructions are approximations rather than exact portraits. Still, even with those limitations, they provide something valuable. They help modern humans see ancient people not as abstract evolutionary steps, but as living members of humanity. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of facial reconstruction is the way it changes assumptions about difference. A bare Neanderthal skull may initially seem intimidating or unfamiliar. A reconstructed Neanderthal face, however, often appears unexpectedly recognizable. The same is true for many ancient populations. Once skin and expression return, the gap between ancient and modern humans narrows dramatically. The viewer begins noticing similarities instead of only differences. Eyes still carry emotion. Faces still suggest personality. The basic structure of human social recognition remains intact across thousands of years. Ancient skulls teach scientific lessons about evolution and adaptation, but reconstructed faces reveal something quieter and more emotional. Humanity has changed over time, yet certain parts of the human experience remain strangely recognizable across enormous distances in history. When ancient faces regain skin and expression, they stop looking like mysteries from another species. They begin looking like forgotten relatives returning briefly from the deep past. Modern humans rarely think of their own faces as temporary. A person wakes each morning, looks into a mirror, and sees the same general human form reflected back every day of their life. Families resemble one another across generations. Entire societies become accustomed to familiar facial patterns until they begin to feel permanent and natural. Ancient skulls quietly disrupt that illusion. They reveal that the human face has never stayed fixed for very long in evolutionary terms. Brow ridges changed. Jaw sizes shifted. Skull proportions transformed. Entire populations appeared, adapted, mixed, and disappeared. The face modern humans consider normal today is only one moment within a much longer biological process. For some people, this realization creates a subtle but powerful discomfort. Part of that discomfort comes from the human desire for stability. People naturally want to believe certain things remain constant across time, especially identity itself. The face feels deeply connected to personhood. Humans recognize one another primarily through facial features. Emotion, trust, attraction, memory, and social belonging all become attached to the human face. Ancient skulls suggest that even this most familiar part of human identity can slowly transform across thousands of years. The realization creates an unsettling possibility. If ancient humans once looked normal to each other, but appear unusual to modern observers now, then modern faces may someday appear equally strange to future humans. The face in the mirror stops feeling permanent. Time itself becomes visible inside anatomy. There is also something unsettling about realizing how much environment shapes the body. Ancient skulls demonstrate that climate, food, disease, migration, and physical lifestyle all influenced human appearance over long periods. Modern humans often imagine identity as something separate from nature, as though civilization lifted humanity beyond environmental influence. Yet the skull quietly records a different story. Human anatomy responds continuously to the world around it. Ancient faces changed because ancient worlds changed. If future environments shift dramatically, human faces may continue changing as well. Evolution did not stop simply because modern civilization appeared. This idea can feel strangely destabilizing because it removes the illusion that humanity reached a final form. Technology adds another layer to this discomfort. Modern life increasingly alters the conditions shaping human biology. Softer diets affect jaw development, medicine changes survival patterns, global migration reshapes population mixing. Some researchers even speculate that future technologies could influence human evolution in ways difficult to predict. Ancient skulls remind people that anatomy adapts slowly across time, but modern civilization is transforming the environment faster than ever before. The future human face may eventually differ from modern faces, just as modern faces differ from many ancient ones. No one knows exactly how. That uncertainty itself can feel unsettling, yet beneath the discomfort lies something almost philosophical. Ancient skulls force humans to confront scale. Individual lives feel large and emotionally important from the inside. But evolution unfolds across spans of time, so enormous that entire civilizations become brief moments. A skull buried for 40,000 years silently compresses unimaginable stretches of human history into one physical object. Looking at ancient faces can create a strange awareness that modern humanity exists within a much larger flow of change. The people alive today are not the final version of humanity any more than Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens were. Every generation becomes part of a process still unfolding. Perhaps this is why ancient skulls continue holding such emotional power even outside science. They challenge modern assumptions about permanence. The familiar human face suddenly appears fragile and temporary rather than fixed and eternal. Yet there is another side to that realization as well. Ancient humans look different, but they still experienced fear, attachment, hunger, grief, cooperation, curiosity, and survival. The face changed across time, but many human experiences remained recognizable. Evolution altered anatomy without erasing the deeper continuity of being human. Ancient skulls therefore create two feelings at once. They remind people how much humanity changes, and how much somehow remains. The modern face may only be temporary, but the long human story flowing through it continues forward into futures no living person will ever fully see. When people look at ancient skulls, they often imagine evolution as something finished long ago. The strange faces belong to the past, while modern humanity seems complete and stable. Yet the deeper lesson of ancient skulls is the opposite. Human anatomy has always been changing, and there is no reason to believe that process suddenly stopped in the present. If humans continue surviving for tens of thousands of years into the future, future skulls may eventually look as unfamiliar to modern people as Neanderthal skulls once did to early scientists. The difference is that future changes may emerge from conditions no ancient human ever experienced before. Predicting future human evolution is difficult because evolution does not follow a planned direction. It responds to changing environments, lifestyles, and survival pressures. Ancient humans adapted to cold climates, hard diets, isolation, disease, and physically demanding lives. Modern humans now live inside technological environments, increasingly shaped by medicine, machines, global migration, and digital systems. The pressures acting on the body today differ dramatically from those that shaped ancient skulls. If those conditions remain stable long enough, anatomy could slowly respond over many future generations. One area scientists sometimes discuss is the jaw. Human faces have already become smaller over the last several thousand years, partly due to softer diets and reduced chewing demands. Modern humans eat foods requiring far less physical effort than those eaten by prehistoric populations. Some researchers suggest jaws could continue becoming smaller if current dietary patterns persist over immense spans of time. Wisdom teeth might become even less common or disappear entirely in some populations through evolutionary processes. Ancient skulls already preserve evidence of this long reduction in jaw size. Future skulls could continue the trend under certain conditions. The shape of the skull itself might also change subtly alongside shifts in development and lifestyle. Human brains consume enormous amounts of energy, and skull anatomy reflects the organization of the brain inside it. Scientists remain cautious about making strong predictions here, because intelligence and brain structure are extraordinarily complex. Still, future environments involving heavy dependence on technology, altered social interaction, and changing developmental conditions could potentially influence anatomy over very long periods. Any such changes would unfold slowly across countless generations, far beyond the scale of ordinary human experience. global migration may influence future faces even more strongly. For most of ancient history, many human populations remain geographically separated for long periods. Today, movement across continents happens constantly. Genetic mixing between populations occurs on a scale ancient humans rarely experienced. Over thousands of years, this could gradually reduce some regional anatomical differences that once developed through isolation. Future human skulls may reflect a more interconnected global ancestry than most ancient populations ever possessed. Ancient skulls reveal how isolation shaped diversity. Modern civilization may reshape diversity through connection instead. Technology introduces another possibility entirely. Modern medicine changes survival patterns in ways evolution has never encountered before. Conditions that once prevented reproduction or survival no longer operate under the same pressures. Artificial environments protect humans from climate extremes that shaped ancient anatomy for thousands of years. Some scientists even speculate that future genetic technologies could eventually influence human biology directly, though such possibilities remain uncertain and ethically complicated. Ancient humans evolved primarily through natural environmental pressures. Future humans may increasingly live inside worlds designed and controlled by technology itself. Yet there is an important limit to all these predictions. Evolution cannot be forecast precisely because the future environment itself remains unknown. Climate shifts, disease, migration, social structures, and technological change may all reshape human life in unexpected ways. Ancient skulls teach scientists humility, partly because the past repeatedly turned out more complicated than earlier theories predicted. The same caution applies to the future. Humanity will likely continue changing, but exactly how remains impossible to know with certainty. There is something strangely humbling about imagining future humans studying modern skulls the way modern scientists study ancient ones now. They may notice features modern people never think about. They may wonder why 21st century humans had certain jaw shapes, dental patterns, or facial proportions connected to lifestyles long vanished from memory. The face modern people recognize in mirrors today may someday become another ancient face from a forgotten world. Ancient skulls remind humanity that no version of the human form lasts forever. If future humans one day uncover modern skulls buried beneath the remains of cities, roads, and collapsed buildings, how would they see us? The question sounds distant at first, almost imaginary, yet ancient skulls create exactly the same experience for modern scientists today. People living tens of thousands of years ago almost certainly viewed their own faces as ordinary and familiar. They could not know that future humans would someday stare at their skulls in museums and describe them as unusual, primitive, or strangely shaped. Modern humans may simply occupy the same position now without realizing it. The face seen in mirrors every day feels permanent only because people are accustomed to it. Future humans may not feel the same way at all. If human anatomy continues changing slowly over immense spans of time, future observers could notice features in modern skulls that seem surprisingly different from their own. They might see large jaws compared to whatever facial proportions exist in their era. They may notice dental patterns connected to diets long abandoned. Skull thickness, facial width, or cranial shape could appear characteristic of a harsh transitional period in human history shaped by industrialization, pollution, processed food, and early digital technology. The details are impossible to predict precisely, but ancient skulls show that anatomy people consider normal can eventually become historically specific and unfamiliar. There is something psychologically difficult about imagining this reversal. Modern people usually think of themselves as observers of history rather than subjects inside it. Ancient skulls belong safely to the past. Modern humanity feels current, central, and stable by comparison. Yet future perspectives may erase that illusion completely. Future scientists may study 21st century humans as transitional populations living during an unstable technological era. Our faces could become evidence of environmental conditions, dietary habits, and lifestyles future humans no longer share. The modern skull may eventually look as historically specific as a medieval sword or an ancient stone tool looks today. Some future differences may emerge not from dramatic evolution, but from subtle developmental changes repeated over thousands of years. Human faces already respond strongly to diet, environment, and childhood growth conditions. If future humans live in radically different physical environments, even small shifts accumulating generation after generation could eventually produce noticeable anatomical differences. Artificial habitats, altered gravity during long-term space travel, changing climate conditions, or future medical technologies might influence development in ways impossible to fully imagine now. Ancient skulls remind people that environments quietly shape anatomy across time, often without anyone noticing while the changes occur. There is also an emotional dimension to this idea. Future humans studying modern skulls might not only analyze anatomy, they may also wonder about the lives connected to those bones. Just as modern scientists reconstruct ancient faces and imagine prehistoric emotions, future people may try to understand what it felt like to live during the early technological centuries of human civilization. They might see modern humans as psychologically overwhelmed by rapid change, environmental uncertainty, and expanding digital systems. A modern skull could become not just a biological artifact, but a symbol of an era when humanity transformed its world faster than ever before. Ancient skulls already inspire similar reflections about the fears and struggles of vanished populations. Another possibility feels even stranger. Future humans may look physically different from modern people while still feeling emotionally recognizable in deeper ways. Ancient facial reconstructions often surprise viewers because the expressions seem familiar despite anatomical differences. Future humans may experience the same reaction toward us. They may notice outdated anatomy while still recognizing emotions, social behavior, curiosity, grief, humor, and fear within the traces of modern humanity. The face changes across time, but certain human experiences continue flowing forward through each new generation. Perhaps the most unsettling lesson hidden inside this thought experiment is that normality itself is temporary. Every generation unconsciously treats its own appearance as standard because it forms the visual center of daily life. Ancient skulls reveal how unstable that assumption truly is. Future humans may eventually see modern faces the way modern people now see ancient ones. Recognizable, human, yet shaped by a world that no longer exists. The skull in the mirror today may someday become another silent fossil from a vanished version of humanity. After looking across ancient skulls from different eras and regions, one question quietly remains beneath all the scientific details. Is there actually a single true human face at all? Modern people often assume there is. The face seen most commonly in everyday life begins to feel normal, stable, and timeless. Yet ancient skulls tell a very different story. Human faces have shifted repeatedly across tens of thousands of years. Brow ridges expanded and receded, jaws widened and narrowed. Skull shapes lengthened, shortened, and changed gradually with migration, diet, climate, isolation, and culture. The farther scientists look into the past, the harder it becomes to identify any single fixed version of humanity. Instead, humanity begins to resemble something constantly moving through time. One reason this feels unsettling is because humans naturally search for permanence. People want clear definitions of identity, especially when it comes to the human body itself. The face feels deeply personal and emotionally important. It carries recognition, memory, emotion, and social belonging. Ancient skulls challenge the comforting idea that the human face exists in one final form. They reveal that what people consider ordinary is often temporary and historically specific. A face that appears completely normal in one era may seem unusual in another thousands of years later. Human appearance changes slowly enough that individuals rarely notice it happening, yet over immense stretches of time the transformation becomes unmistakable. Ancient humans almost certainly viewed their own faces as familiar and ordinary too. They could not know future generations would study their skulls and describe them as ancient-looking. This realization changes the way modern humans see themselves. The present no longer feels permanent. Modern faces become part of the same ongoing process rather than the end point of evolution. Humanity stops looking like a finished design and begins looking more like a long adaptation still unfolding. Ancient skulls therefore reveal something larger than anatomy. They reveal instability at the center of what humans often imagine as fixed identity. Yet there is another side to this story that matters equally. Even while faces changed dramatically across time, something recognizable remained. Ancient humans adapted to frozen plains, deserts, forests, coastlines, mountains, and islands, yet they still formed families, cooperated socially, cared for children, feared danger, and searched for meaning inside uncertain worlds. Facial structure changed, but human emotional life retained remarkable continuity. Modern facial reconstructions make this especially clear. Once ancient skulls regain eyes, skin, and expression, the distance between past and present suddenly narrows. Ancient humans stop feeling entirely foreign. Their faces begin reflecting emotions modern people instantly recognize. This creates a strange paradox. Humanity changes constantly, yet humanity also remains strangely continuous. The skull transforms, but the deeper patterns of human experience continue flowing forward through each generation. Perhaps there was never a single real human face, because humanity was never meant to remain biologically still. Evolution operates through adaptation, variation, and movement across time. Ancient skulls preserve snapshots from different moments inside that process rather than permanent categories. Every human population carried traits shaped by its environment, ancestry, and history. No single face represented humanity completely. The human story always contained diversity, overlap, migration, and transformation. In this sense, the search for one final human appearance may misunderstand what humanity actually is. Human beings are not static objects. They are changing populations moving through changing worlds. This realization can feel unsettling at first because it removes certainty, but it can also create a quieter perspective. Ancient skulls remind modern people that differences always existed inside the human story. Faces changed because environments changed. Humanity adapted because adaptation allowed survival. The face in the mirror today is neither the first nor final version of being human. It is one temporary expression of a species still shaped by time, environment, culture, and history. Tens of thousands of years from now, future humans may carry faces modern people would barely recognize, yet they may still laugh, grieve, love, fear, and wonder in ways deeply familiar to us. Ancient skulls therefore leave behind one final possibility. Perhaps being human was never about preserving one unchanging face. Perhaps being human has always meant the ability to change without completely losing connection to those who came before. After everything scientists have learned from ancient skulls, the original question still remains strangely difficult to answer in a simple way. Why do ancient skulls look so different? At first, the question seems scientific. Climate shaped the face, diet influenced the jaw, isolation changed populations over time, migration mixed human groups together. Evolution responded slowly to environments across thousands of generations. All of these explanations are real and supported by evidence. Yet beneath the science, another deeper realization slowly appears. Ancient skulls look different because humanity itself has never stood still. The human face was never fixed. It was always moving through time alongside the changing world around it. Modern people often imagine the past as distant and disconnected from themselves. Ancient skulls sitting inside museum glass can appear almost separate from ordinary human life. The heavy brows, broad jaws, and unfamiliar proportions seem to belong to vanished creatures from another age. But this distance can be misleading. Those skulls once belonged to living people who probably viewed themselves exactly the way modern humans do now. They woke each morning inside familiar bodies. They recognized family members by their faces. They laughed, feared danger, protected children, and tried to survive uncertain futures. Their faces felt normal to them because every generation experiences its own appearance as ordinary. Time alone transformed those familiar faces into something modern people now call ancient. In this way, ancient skulls reveal how deeply human perception depends on the present moment. The modern face feels stable only because modern people are surrounded by it constantly, yet ancient skulls quietly expose that illusion. They remind humanity that even the most familiar parts of identity change across enormous stretches of time. The shape of the skull records adaptation not only to climate and food, but also to history itself. Entire landscapes disappeared. Ice sheets advanced and retreated. Forests expanded and vanished. Oceans rose. Populations migrated. Technologies emerged. Human anatomy changed together with those shifting worlds. Bone became a slow-moving record of survival written across generations. There is something humbling about this perspective. Modern civilization often creates the feeling that humanity exists outside nature, controlling the environment rather than adapting to it. Ancient skulls suggest otherwise. The human body remains deeply connected to surrounding conditions, even when people no longer notice the connection clearly. Softer food changes the jaw. Different climates shape breathing structures. Isolation alters population variation. Migration reshapes ancestry. The face modern humans see in mirrors every day carries traces of environmental history stretching far beyond individual lives. Ancient skulls reveal that the body remembers the world around it. Yet perhaps the most important lesson is not about biology at all. Ancient skulls challenge the idea that difference means separation. Throughout history, people often treated unfamiliar faces as evidence of distance or inferiority. But the farther science advanced, the more complicated and interconnected humanity became. Ancient humans mixed, migrated, adapted, and shared ancestry repeatedly across time. No single skull could define humanity completely. Human variation turned out to be part of the human story rather than evidence against it. The differences preserved in ancient skulls reflect survival under different conditions, not separate forms of human value. Looking at ancient skulls today, therefore, creates two opposite feelings at once. The faces appear unfamiliar enough to remind people that humanity changes constantly, yet they also appear familiar enough to reveal continuity across immense stretches of time. Even the oldest skull still carries recognizable traces of emotion, awareness, and humanity beneath the bone. The modern face emerged from countless earlier faces that once seemed equally ordinary within their own worlds. Perhaps this is why ancient skulls continue fascinating people so deeply. They do not simply answer questions about the past. They quietly turn the question back toward the present. If ancient humans once looked normal to themselves, then modern humanity may also represent only one temporary moment inside a much longer process still unfolding. The face modern people trust as familiar today may someday become another ancient face studied by distant descendants under different skies. Ancient skulls do more than teach scientific facts about evolution, migration, or anatomy. Over time, they begin teaching something quieter about the modern human mind itself. People often approach ancient remains searching for difference. They want to know why those faces look strange, why those jaws were larger, why those skulls seem unfamiliar compared to modern humans. Yet the deeper lesson slowly moves in the opposite direction. The farther scientists study ancient humans, the more difficult it becomes to separate modern humanity completely from the people who lived tens of thousands of years ago. Ancient skulls reveal change, but they also reveal continuity. Beneath all the shifting anatomy, something recognizably human continues flowing through time. This realization can create humility. Modern civilization often encourages the belief that humanity now exists at the center of history, standing above the ancient past through technology, science, and progress. Ancient skulls quietly weaken that illusion. They remind people that every civilization eventually becomes ancient. Every familiar face eventually disappears. Entire populations once believed their worlds were permanent too. They built tools, adapted to harsh climates, raised children, and survived long enough to leave traces in bone. Yet over immense stretches of time, even the memory of their names vanished. Only fragments of their faces remained beneath the earth. There is something important in remembering this. Ancient skulls also teach humility because they reveal how incomplete human knowledge can be. Again and again, scientists formed confident explanations about human evolution, only to discover new fossils that complicated the picture entirely. Some skulls appeared too modern for their age, others combined unexpected traits. DNA overturned long-standing assumptions about ancient populations. Entire branches of humanity remained hidden until tiny fragments of bone revealed their existence. The human story repeatedly proved more tangled, connected, and mysterious than earlier generations imagined. Ancient skulls, therefore, teach caution against oversimplified certainty. Humanity often wants clear categories and final answers, but the past rarely cooperates so neatly. Another lesson emerges from the way ancient skulls changed scientific understanding of human difference. Earlier generations sometimes treated unfamiliar skulls as evidence of separation or superiority. Modern research instead revealed deep shared ancestry across all human populations. Ancient humans migrated, mixed, and adapted continuously. The boundaries people once imagined between groups turned out to be far less rigid than expected. Ancient skulls, therefore, carry an educational message with lasting importance. Human variation is real, but variation does not erase connection. Diversity became part of how humanity survived. Across deserts, ice sheets, forests, mountains, and coastlines over immense spans of time, the differences preserved in ancient faces reflect adaptation to different worlds, not different levels of humanity. There is also a quieter emotional lesson hidden inside these remains. Ancient skulls remind modern people that ordinary human lives matter, even when history forgets their names completely. Most ancient humans left behind no written records, monuments, or personal stories. Yet the shape of their faces still carries evidence of survival, struggle, adaptation, and existence. A worn tooth reveals years of difficult meals. A healed injury suggests survival after pain. A skull buried carefully may hint at mourning and social care. Bone preserves traces of lives that otherwise disappeared into silence. Modern people looking at ancient skulls are not only observing biology, they are encountering evidence that countless forgotten humans once moved through the world with fears, relationships, and emotions as real to them as modern life feels now. Perhaps this is why ancient skulls continue affecting people so deeply even outside scientific contexts. They confront modern humanity with scale, fragility, and continuity all at once. Human beings change, faces change, civilizations change, yet generation after generation, humans continue asking the same quiet questions about identity, survival, meaning, and belonging. Ancient skulls become powerful not because they are alien, but because they reveal how temporary modern certainty truly is. The face modern people recognize today will not last forever either. One day, it too may become ancient. And perhaps the most valuable lesson hidden inside ancient skulls is not fear of change, but acceptance of connection across time. Humanity has always been changing, but it has also always remained deeply human through every transformation. Night after night, ancient skulls continue resting silently in museums, research laboratories, caves, and forgotten layers of earth beneath modern cities. Some belong to hunters crossing frozen landscapes beneath Ice Age skies. Some belong to children who never reached adulthood. Some belong to people who watched coastlines disappear beneath rising seas or walked across lands. Modern humans no longer remember existed. Their languages vanished. Their names disappeared. Entire worlds surrounding them dissolved into time. Yet the shape of their faces remained long enough for strangers in another age to wonder who they were. For all the science surrounding ancient skulls, there is still something almost impossible about this fact. Bone survives longer than memory. Throughout this journey, the question seemed simple at first. Why do ancient skulls look so different? Science answered part of it. Climate-shaped breathing structures, hard diets, strengthened jaws. Isolation changed populations gradually across generations. Migration mixed human groups together again and again. Evolution responded slowly to environments unfolding across immense spans of time. Ancient skulls became records of adaptation written in bone, but somewhere along the way, the question changed into something larger. The deeper mystery was never only why ancient humans looked different. The deeper mystery was why modern humans expect themselves not to change at all. Ancient skulls quietly reveal that humanity has always existed inside motion. Faces changed because worlds changed. The human body adapted because survival required adaptation. No single face remained permanent. Yet despite all those transformations, ancient humans still carried recognizable traces of fear, attachment, curiosity, grief, and hope. The face shifted across time, but something deeper continued moving through every generation. Modern people often think of themselves as separated from the distant past by civilization and technology. Ancient skulls narrow that distance. A worn tooth still reflects hunger. A healed fracture still reflects survival. The curve of a jaw still hints at childhood growth beneath forgotten skies. Looking closely enough at ancient skulls eventually creates a strange realization. Those distant people were not watching history happen. They were simply living ordinary lives inside the only world they knew, just as modern humans do now. They could not imagine that thousands of years later, strangers would study the shape of their faces searching for meaning. One day, modern humanity may stand in the same position. Future humans may uncover modern skulls beneath ruins of cities not yet built. They may study the shape of modern jaws, the wear on modern teeth, the proportions of modern faces shaped by technologies and environments still unfolding today. They may wonder what fears occupied the minds of people living during the early centuries of planetary civilization. They may describe modern humanity as transitional, incomplete, or strangely adapted to a vanished world. And perhaps they will feel the same mixture of familiarity and distance modern people feel now when looking into ancient faces. There is something peaceful hidden inside this possibility. Ancient skulls remind humanity that change is not failure. Transformation has always been part of being human. The face in the mirror today was shaped by countless earlier faces stretching backward through time beyond memory. Every generation inherits traces of worlds it never saw. Every human life becomes part of a larger story, continuing forward long after individual names disappear. Bone records only fragments of that story, yet even fragments are enough to reveal continuity moving beneath constant change. Tonight, somewhere beneath stone, sand, ice, forests, deserts, and oceans, ancient skulls still remain in darkness untouched by modern eyes. Some may belong to human populations science has not yet discovered. Some may preserve histories that could reshape everything modern people think they understand about themselves. Humanity still knows only a small portion of its own past, and perhaps that is the final lesson ancient skulls leave behind. The human story was never as simple, stable, or complete as people wanted to believe. It was always larger, older, and more unfinished than it first appeared. And if future humans one day look back at the skulls of our own time, with the same quiet curiosity we now feel toward the ancient dead, what parts of us will seem familiar to them, and what parts will look impossibly strange?